boxing video, and this one is about boxing history. And I'm going to talk about marvelous Marvin Hagler. Why I think that Marvin Hagler is overrated. Once again, I want to be clear: overrated does not mean he's a bum. It does not mean he's a bad fighter. It doesn't mean he's not a great fighter, because he is a great fighter. Marvin Hagler was a great middleweight. He's one of the greatest fighters of all time. But the way people talk about him, you would think he is this unbeatable, indestructible, like, oh my God, can't lose to anybody type fighter. He's the biggest and baddest dude and this and that. I think a lot of it comes down to his personality, his blue collar mentality, his toughness, his, everyone's out to get me gimmick that they were doing back then. He kind of reminds me of like a middleweight Joe Frazier in that sense, where Frazier, he was like the underdog, blue collar kind of guy. Ali and Leonard, they were more like the flashy guy who got all the, promotion and all the love, whatever. Marvin Hagler, first and foremost, he only fought at middleweight. He never moved up, only fought at middleweight. Now, I understand back in those days, it was middleweight, then it was light heavyweight. There was no such thing as a super middleweight. So I understand that Hagler, it was more difficult to move up in those days. But still, he only held that one belt, on one weight class. Okay, fine, whatever. Hagler loses to Willie Monroe early in his career. I know he lost a fight earlier, but people said that was BS. There's no footage of it, so what are you going to do? He lost to Willie Monroe. Willie Monroe was not rated at the time. I don't think in the top 10. I could be wrong on that. Willie Monroe Sr. I'm talking about here, by Ring Magazine or KO Magazine. Nobody even brings that up. But okay, he lost to a guy that wasn't really that great. And it's funny because if a guy like Golovkin even struggles with somebody, at middleweight a few years back, it's like the biggest deal in the world. He then goes on to fight Vito Antuofermo on the Sugar Ray Leonard Wilfred Benitez undercard, I think it was. And he has a draw with Antuofermo. I know a lot of people thought he won that fight, but he did kind of take his foot off the gas, and it's almost like a De La Hoya Trinidad situation where you probably should have won the fight anyways, but you can blame them for not doing more. He then beat a lot of other contenders, and then he beat Alan Minter for the world title in the UK. The fans start throwing the beer bottles at him, this, that, and whatever. And that further pushes the whole narrative that Hagler is, everyone's out to get him, which there might have been something to that. My thing with Hagler is this. Everyone talks about Hopkins is running middleweight and how it wasn't so fire. Who are the great middleweights that Hagler beat? He beat a lot of good middleweights, like Alan Minter, Vito Antuofermo, who he beat in the rematch, Hamsho, Sims, Mugabe, who he struggled with, the other, Obamayas. Like, he beat a lot of good contenders, and he held the title for a while, but his big wins in his career are versus people like Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, and Sugar Ray Leonard lost. Those are the big fights of his career. And those are all smaller guys who moved up. So everyone always talks about the Fab Four, all this stuff about the Fab Four. Hagler always had the luxury of everyone else moving up to his weight class. And he was younger than Duran. So when Duran, who was a lightweight, then he was a welterweight, then he was a junior middleweight, he fights Hagler. Hagler struggles versus Duran. He won the fight, but it wasn't an impressive performance. This is the same Duran that at 147, Leonard made quit. At 154, Wilfred Benitez outboxed clearly. Kirkland Lang beat him, and he got knocked out a year later at a lower weight class by Tommy Hearns at 154. That's not that impressive to me. The fact that he's struggling with a guy who's much smaller than him, it was telling. And it showed a lot of his flaws too. That he had trouble with like these guys with good head movement, and that was the big thing in that fight, if I'm not mistaken. That Hagler, Duran kind of knew that Hagler didn't like to lead. He liked to be a counterpuncher and this, that. But he still won the fight. He fought Thomas Hearns. That's his best win of his career by far. Obviously one of the great fights in history. Takes a huge shot from Hearns. Comes back and knocks out Thomas Hearns in that third round after getting that cut. And he's like, I'm not letting this fight go to lose. I'm not losing on a cut. Boom. And Unbelievable, unbelievable knockout. He then fought Mugabe, didn't look so great. Then he fights Leonard, and everyone makes this big thing about, oh my God, Leonard. First of all, people say that it was a robbery, that Leonard shouldn't have won. In my book, Leonard won that fight easily. And whatever you think about the scoring of that fight, even if you thought Hagler won, the fact that it was that close is crazy when you consider that Sugar Ray Leonard is a welterweight, never fought at middleweight before. He had one fight in the previous 5 years, comes in there and is able to hang with Hagler. How is Hagler not dominating this guy? And this is the guy that people say is the greatest middleweight of all time. I just don't buy it. I think Hagler was a great fighter, but I think his legend is greater than his skill set and accomplishments. I don't know if he's any better than Bernard Hopkins as a middleweight, and I would like to see how he would do versus Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones, maybe even a guy like James Toney. It would be interesting to see how he would do, or Triple G as well, Canelo, et cetera, et cetera. Any of the great middleweights in the last 30 years or so. I think Hagler was a great fighter, but this is the thing that also drives me crazy is when people say he's the best of the Fab Four because he, head to head. First of all, he was bigger than them, so on a pound for pound level, I think you have to factor that in. And to me, he's clearly the worst of the Fab Four. I mean, he doesn't have the depth in first of all weight classes like Leonard, 4-weight world champion, Duran, 3-weight world champion, and Tommy Hearns, who was boxing's first ever 5-weight champion. He doesn't have that, Marvin Hagler. He's a 1-weight champion. And those guys, to me, all have more impressive top 3 wins. If you look at Roberto Duran's top 3 wins, Leonard at 47, Davey Moore at 54, and Aaron Barkley at 160. When you consider, the weight that he covered, to me, that's more impressive than Duran, Hearns, and I don't know, whoever his third best win is. Let's say it's, Anna Fermo, I don't know, or someone like that, or Minter or Hamsho at middleweight, because those guys are moving up, Hearns and Duran. If you look at Hearns' top 3 wins, first of all, a lot of people thought he should have gotten that second fight versus Leonard. I thought it was a draw, but you could have had either way. But knocking out Duran, that's better than Hagler at a higher weight, going the distance, 15 rounds. Benitez at 54, that's better than any win that Hagler has besides for the Thomas Hearns win. And I would say Hearns beating Virgil Hill and Pino Cuevas is a better win than Hagler beating anyone else besides for Hearns. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that I know Hagler beat Hearns head-to-head, but to me, his body of work, Hearns, is better. If you want to say single best win, maybe Hagler knocking out Hearns is better than Hearns knocking out Duran. Maybe, but Duran was never stopped before. Hearns was. But I could hear that one. And then we go to Leonard. Leonard, who I thought he legitimately beat Hagler. He beat Hagler, Hearns, when Hearns was at his better weight, 147, and he knocked Hearns out, not the 160 Hearns. And he outboxed Duran in a way that Hagler could never outbox Duran in that second fight. And even in the third fight, you saw how easily Leonard beat Duran at 160. And that was at middleweight, 162, whatever catch weight. So to me, he's clearly the worst of the Fab Four. I don't even think it's close between him and those other 3 guys. Maybe him and Hearns is debatable, but between him and those other 2, Leonard and Duran, I don't think it's close. Please let me know what you guys think. Is Marvin Hagler overrated, or am I just, off of what I'm saying? Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace.